Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Tracey Devlyn, and I am here with New York Times bestseller Chris Bohjalian to talk about his newest historical novel, The Jackal's Mistress. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hey, Tracy, great to meet you and great to see you all.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us here, and congratulations to you on the publication of your 25th book.
Thank you.
What an exciting milestone.
Oh, it is, but I consider it far more impressive that I am in the midst of my 35th book tour. Anyone can write 25 novels, but 35 book tours, that is iron person stuff.
So I'm trying to work out the mathematics on this. How is it that you have 25 novels but 35 book tours?
10 paperback book tours at least. It might be
Okay.
more because I really didn't tour for my first three novels.
Okay, okay, got it. All right, wonderful. Well, thanks for clearing up my mathematic problem there.
It's a good question.
So I love that The Jackal's Mistress was inspired by a true story. Why don't you just get us started by giving us an overview of your story, and then maybe share with us how that moment in history sparked the writing of this amazing novel?
Oh, thank you. Back in 2003, an editor at Reader's Digest heard about a small anecdote in the Shenandoah Valley. A Union abolitionist, part of the Vermont Brigade, was dying, and he was saved by two formerly enslaved people and the wife of a Confederate officer. She
Mhm.
made this decision with these two other adults in her world that she would want a Yankee woman, course, as a Yankee woman might be, to keep her husband alive if he were dying somewhere in Pennsylvania and Maryland, or at least to be with him when he passed. So,
Mhm.
despite the fact that this was a part of the Shenandoah Valley in 1864, in which the battles were wildly fluid, there were John Bo Mosby's Confederate Rangers hanging George Armstrong Custer's Union cavalrymen, and Custer was hanging Mosby's Rangers. It was an
Mhm.
area of the Shenandoah still controlled by Jubal Early's Confederate Army. She made a decision to hide him, do her best to heal him if she could, and then, if possible, bring him back across the lines to the Union garrison in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. I researched the story. It ran in October of 2003 in Reader's Digest, and I was very, very moved by this man from the North and this woman from the South, but I didn't see a novel in it. Back in 2003, I was writing novels like The Double Bind or The Buffalo Soldier or Midwives. I wasn't writing historical fiction.
Yeah.
Flash forward to 2022, 19 years later, and I am in Richmond. I am on the Lioness book tour, and you're in North Carolina. You're in a state that feels the Civil War in the same way that Richmond might feel it in ways that we
Yeah.
don't in Vermont. The closest thing Vermont had to a Civil War battle was a botched bank robbery up at the Canadian border in which no shots were fired and no one was hurt. So it's 2022. And I thought about Richmond and I thought about the Civil War and I thought about that article I had written 19 years earlier, and it dawned on me. If we ever needed a novel, a Civil War Romeo and Juliet, a love story about the North and South, a book that might be about healing, it was now. And I decided to go back to that research and then do a much, much deeper dive
Mhm.
into the story, learn all that I could, and from that tiny little anecdote, build what I hope is another novel in that magnificent Civil War canon of literature we have between the Red Badge of Courage and Cold Mountain and so many remarkable books. And I was off and running.
Well, you have made your mark, so you are
Thank
right
you.
up there with those for sure. This was an amazing story, and as I'm reading through it, I'm like, after it's all said and done, after they get through the story, and I'm thinking about Libby and how her neighbors would perceive her for having done this, because many obviously lost family members in the war and might have some hatred for the other side and everything. And just living in that environment and that community afterwards,
Yeah.
I just, I really felt her courage in that moment to make that decision to help this Union soldier.
Oh, in my novel, Libby Stedman is one of my favorite
Yeah.
heroines. When I think of her, I think of Katie Barstow in The Lioness.
Mm.
I think of Mary Deerfield in Hour of the Witch. I think of Sybil Danforth in Midwives, or Elizabeth Endicott in The Sandcastle Girls. And what all of these women, I think, have in common is I'm trying to reverse a trope. And certainly I was doing that in The Jackal's Mistress. The trope in the Civil War novel, the Civil War history, is the courageous male warrior and the demure antebellum woman. And in The Jackal's Mistress, and you can see the way Doubleday so beautifully captured her in the cover, she
Yeah.
is
They got a little lip in
brilliant.
there.
Oh, yeah, she does. She's brilliant, she's smart, and she is courageous. And Jonathan Weybridge, my Union abolitionist, is diminished. He's already had most of a leg blown off and then amputated by
Yeah.
field surgeons. He's lost most of a hand. And for the first half of the novel, he is bedridden, hidden by Libby Stedman as she figures out how to keep him safe from either Mosby's Rangers, Confederate soldiers,
Mm.
or the marauders who fill the Shenandoah Valley. And I love the fact that she's a very, very strong woman. Um, on the cover, of course, she's holding a rifle. In the novel, she becomes quite proficient with a Colt revolver.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She was fixated on getting more ammunition and wanting to practice and things
Yeah,
like that for obvious reasons.
I mean,
But
I mean, you really did hit the nail on the head, though. She's an isolated woman because
uh,
in the novel,
yeah.
here's the historical reality. 1859, there is John Brown's failed insurrection a mere 20-25 miles away in Harper's Ferry.
Hmm.
So the entire South is on edge. In 1860, in the novel, Libby Stedman's husband, Peter, frees the 12 human beings who are enslaved at his grist mill and small farm,
Hmm.
and then goes off to war. So
Yeah.
here we have Libby Stedman, who is now the wife of that man who freed his slaves and is now trying to run a grist mill with two formerly enslaved members of this community. So, yeah, she is, if not exactly a pariah, she's
Yeah.
not especially trusted, but she is a profoundly accurate moral compass, just like my Union abolitionist, Jonathan Weybridge. And here's an
Yeah.
Easter egg: I live in Weybridge, Vermont.
Ah, nice. Well, I did notice that with many of the names and the character names in this story, you had a lovely author's note at the end. I love reading author's note, and so you find out what is fact and fiction and that sort of thing. So you did change some of the names of the characters in the book, and I guess my question is, how do you know when to put historical events precisely on the page versus when you can bend and mold them into, what the novel needs in order to make it an exciting, entertaining
Yeah.
read?
Okay, here's the reality: what actually happened. And we know very, very little. There's a Union soldier. There's a rebel woman whose husband is lost somewhere in the Union POW system. There are two other adults at the gristmill, this formerly enslaved husband and wife, and a
Mhm.
10-year-old niece. In real life, Betty Van Meter keeps Henry Bedell alive against all odds. That's really all we know.
Okay. Okay.
So, for
All
purposes
right.
of my novel, I wanted to do something a little grander, a little more epic. I mean, the reality is, we are a nation built on genocide and
Mm,
slavery.
mm,
Those are two criminal realities of who we
mm,
are as a nation that we are still grappling with. So, for my book, I wanted to see if there was a way that two human beings with wildly different worldviews could somehow figure it out. And before I knew it, it was growing into a love story because I love stories. So it wouldn't have been fair to the real Betty Van
mm,
Meter and the real Henry Bedell to have used their names or suggest that Libby Stedman in my novel is Betty Van Meter because she's not. But here's
mm,
one of the interesting things about where fact and fiction collide. In real life, you have a Vermont farmer, abolitionist, Henry Bedell. In real life, you have Aldous Walker, the 1862 Middlebury College valedictorian, and by 1864, a major in the Vermont Brigade. Almost all we know about this farmer, Henry Bedell, who's dying and his life is saved, is from Aldous Walker's 1869 book, The Vermont
mm,
Brigade in the Shenandoah Valley. And in chapter 8, there's what Aldous Walker calls an episode. And the episode is the injury to Henry Bedell and this unknown, a previously unknown rebel woman who saves his life.
mm,
Aldous Walker would go on to be a lawyer and would pass the bar in 2 states and is articulate and profound and a beautiful writer. So in my novel, Jonathan Weybridge, my hero, so to speak, my real hero, of course, is my protagonist, Libby Stedman, the heroine. But Jonathan Weybridge has the injuries of Henry Bedell, but the voice of Middlebury's
mm,
Aldous Walker, and in fact is a college professor at Middlebury College.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Well, you did a phenomenal job with this cast of characters. They each had their own strengths and their own fears. And one of my favorite scenes was in the parlor with young Jubilee, her niece, Libby's niece, when she started listing off all the things that she had already accomplished with while Jonathan, this gravely injured soldier, was being a lazy beast, as she said. She was so fun. She was such a firecracker of a character all the way to the end.
She is a firecracker. I've never used that word for her, but Tracey, that is the perfect word for her.
Yeah.
Jubilee is a firecracker. She is one of those tweens with no filter, and
It's
she
true.
has many issues with the presence of this Yankee blue belly suddenly in her house. But it begins with this: to hide him, she suddenly has to share her bedroom with her Aunt Libby so that the jackal, which is, Jonathan Weybridge gets his name, the jackal, from Firecracker Jubilee because he's such
Yeah.
a lazy beast,
Yeah.
as he's, trying desperately not to die.
Yes.
But
Yes.
she has to give up her bedroom, to share it with her aunt, and just to clean his slop jars, and she has to feed him, and so she christens him the jackal.
Yeah.
Um, but what I love is the way their relationship evolves.
Hmm.
And she can be, in some ways, the historical messenger that the adult characters can't. She can ask the questions that the adult characters won't ask or can't ask about what is going on in the United States in 1864
Hmm.
and why are 620,000 people going to die.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm be very careful of spoilers here, but I loved the gem of an epilogue that you gave us at the end too.
Oh,
So
thank you.
I'll just leave it at that and let the folks be surprised by that. But that was a really nice way to put a little bow on the story. So that was great.
Thank you. Well, I love endings that, as you said, have a bow on them. I love endings that are
Yeah.
Aristotelian. On
Mm,
the one hand, you're surprised. On
yeah.
the other hand, you're thinking, oh, it couldn't have ended any other way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes I stick the landing and sometimes I don't.
More often than not, Mr. Chris.
Oh, thank you, Tracey. Thank you.
Um, at what point do you decide a story idea has legs enough to be a full novel? Do you
I
have
think
that kind of aha moment or
I've had many aha moments where I thought there was a novel and I would get 50 to 100 pages into it and realized, no, this is not your next
ouch,
novel. And
ouch.
Scott Fitzgerald talked often about the dead ends you reach when you're writing a novel. Anne Patchett has a lovely essay. It goes back many years, and she talks a little bit about how there's always a moment in a novel when it tries to kill itself. Sometimes you're 100 pages in, sometimes you're 150, and
Uh,
that's when you need to make the decision. Do I
mhm.
power through or do I give up? But there's always that self doubt that perhaps my talent is not commensurate with my
Mm,
original vision. And I've had those moments. And I went to college in Western Massachusetts, and my papers are there. And there are at least three partial novels and two finished novels that I never published
uh,
because they weren't good enough.
yeah. Wow, interesting. What is it that you hope that readers think about long after they've closed the covers of The Jackal's Mistress?
I'll tell you two things. It's a great question. One micro, one macro. Here's the micro, the love story. When I was interviewing historians about this anecdote, most of them knew nothing about it. So I'd have to tell them about it because it is such a small part of a cataclysmic war. But the one historian who did know about it said to me, what do you think, Chris? Were they lovers? And I said, well, in my novel, they sure are. And he said, good, good for you. We need more lovers. And I hope readers like that part of the book. But then there's the macro part, where we are as a nation.
Hmm.
In 2017, I heard David McCullough on Terry Gross. And Terry Gross said to David, great historian, she said, well, David, has our nation ever been as divided as we are now? And David had a great laugh. And David laughed and said, oh, well, Terry, there was that dust up in 1861, and 1968 wasn't pretty. And so here's the macro part. I always want to have such faith in our nation and in Americans and in all 50 states that even now, as horrifically divided as we are, we can yet find our better angels and return to a nation that believes that we can peacefully coexist with divergent opinions and we can celebrate all Americans despite all of our differences.
Mm. Yes, yes. I think that's a beautiful way to wrap up this interview. But before we go, Chris, can you tell us what's up next for you and
I
if you have
can.
any fun projects you can talk about?
Oh, I'm so excited about my next book. It's all
Great.
done. It's already in
Oh,
copy editing. It'll come out
nice.
in August of 2026. And I never want to write the same book twice. I mean,
Yeah.
midwives, the flight attendant, so different. The Sandcastle Girls, the Red Lotus, so different. The Lioness,
Yeah.
the Jackal's Mistress, so different. So, my next book is set between 1978 and 1980, and it is about a young 18-year-old golfer, a soon to be LPGA superstar, very likely because she is very talented and very smart. But 2 weeks before leaving for college, she drives a golf ball through the practice net at her swank country club where she plays, accidentally killing a young caddy and classmate,
Oh.
derailing her life. And suddenly, instead of going to college, she's doing way too many drugs in way too many New York City punk clubs. She's trying to figure out what her next steps are as her life has been so horrifically derailed. It builds to a courtroom drama a la Midwives. And here's my favorite part: it is narrated by a 60 something female novelist known best for a novel about a midwife on trial for manslaughter.
Ah, that's great. I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I can't wait that we got a little ways to wait for it, but I can't wait to see that one pop up in my email too. So that's great.
Tracey, thank you so much for all that you do on behalf of books. It is such a privilege to chat with you.
Well, I really appreciate you being here too, Chris. Folks, when this episode airs, The Jackal's Mistress will be out, so be sure to order your copy today. You can check out Chris's website at Chris Bajalian. Oh, did I say that wrong? Bajalian?
No, you were
Oh, okay.
perfect.
All right. Sorry about that.
Do not be sorry at
ChrisBajalian.com.
all.
Chris, what social media outlets are you most active on?
Oh my gosh, all of them: Instagram, Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky. I am the oldest man on TikTok. You can find me on Goodreads and Litzy.
All right, great. Well, thanks a ton, Chris. Again, congrats on releasing your 25th novel. It was a true pleasure to read The Jackal's Mistress and chat with you about it.
It was a pleasure for me too. Thank you, Tracey. You're the best.
Thank you so much. Many thanks to everyone listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I'll be back soon with another great read. Enjoy the adventure, everyone.